Greetings to our IELTS, OET, and PTE online reviewees worldwide. We are 9.09er from the Philippines, but we have reached 130 countries in 6 continents thanks to the online platform. And with me once again is Coach Brian, our instructor and the head of the online review department. So, for the longest time, we've been focusing on OET writing and OET speaking. But this video is unique because this is our first entry regarding OET reading. So I'm not a nurse by profession, but Sir Brian is. That's why for this particular video, I'm more of the host while Sir Brian is the guest. Typically, I'm the one who's going to ask questions while he will provide the answers. Without further ado, let's ask Coach Brian. Coach Brian, what's the OET reading subtest all about?
Well, the Occupational English Test reading examination is like any other English examination for reading. It's a reading comprehension test. You will be provided 42 question items to respond to, and you will have to read different passages. In total, you will have 3 parts in your OET reading exam, part A, B, and C, and you will have 2 separate timings. 15 minutes for the first part of the examination, which is part A, and you will have a combined time for the latter 2, parts B and C, for 45 minutes, for a grand total of 1 full hour for the entire test.
The way I see it, IELTS reading and OET reading are the same in a sense that both of them, you're given 60 minutes each.
True.
It's just that for IELTS reading, the passages talk about anything actually.
Yeah.
Say for instance, one passage might focus on the different kinds of flowers. And then another passage might focus on the literacy rate in the Philippines. And then another passage might talk about the discovery of a fossil, say for instance, somewhere in Africa. These are typical passages in IELTS reading.
That's
but
true.
for OET, yes, you're also going to encounter passages, but they focus on topics related to the medical field. Say, for instance, one topic or one passage might focus on vaccination. Another passage might focus on hypertension. Another one might talk about diabetes. So that's one take. One difference between IELTS and OET. OET, more relatable for healthcare professionals, whereas IELTS, literally anything under the sun. Now, let's move on to the types of questions. So, Sir Brian, in IELTS reading, I understand that there's true, false, not given, there's matching headings. But what about in OET? Do we also get to encounter these 2 questions?
No, not really. You don't actually encounter these questions. The only types of questions that you will encounter, particularly in part A of the examination, are short answer questions, or fill in the gaps or fill in the blanks questions, as well as some classification questions perhaps. And when you get to parts B and C, everything will be multiple choice. So there are not really a lot of question types when you're taking the OET.
I have a question. I heard that in IELTS reading, the answers must have correct spelling. But in OET reading, is it true that some of the candidates can change or alter the spelling of certain medical terms and still get the correct answer?
That is a very interesting question, because it is so for the listening examination. So when you're taking OET listening, if you misspell something, as long as it's phonetically identical to what the speakers said, that's going to be correct. But for the reading examination, just like IELTS and other English exams, you should follow the spelling in the passages. Actually, the only allowance here is that you can write the answers in whatever spelling convention, whether it is the American or British spelling convention. But you have to make sure that it's still properly spelled.
Thank you for that clarification, Sir Brian. Another one. In IELTS, there's such thing as the academic module and the general training module. And I understand that in OET, there is a type of examination for the 12 different professions in the healthcare industry. I heard that for OET writing and OET speaking, it's profession specific. But what about OET listening and OET reading?
For the 2 subjective types of exams, the subtests, writing and speaking, they're profession specific. So they will be dependent on the profession of the candidates who are taking the examination. But for the objective types of some tests like listening and reading. It's very much standard, so whatever your profession is, your set is going to be the same. And the topics are not only pertinent to a particular healthcare profession, it is applicable to anyone in the healthcare industry, whether you be a nurse or a dietitian, a physiotherapist, a podiatrist, or a doctor. It is applicable to you. So for listening and for reading, there are no differences among all of the different professions who can take the OET. But for writing and for speaking, they're quite different depending on what your profession is.
This discussion is getting more interesting as we get to find out the similarities and differences between IELTS and OET. Let's talk about the grading system. In IELTS, the perfect score is 9.0, and in order to get that, you must have around 39 or 40 correct answers out of 40 questions. If you're aiming for 7, safe to get 31 or 32 correct answers out of 40 points. But when I looked at a sample OET result, I noticed there's A, there's B. At the same time, there are numerical equivalents.
Correct.
Sometimes I get to see 420, sometimes 350. Does it mean that in OET there are like 500 items for listening and reading?
No, that's not really the case, but you
Okay.
have 42 question items and your score will be translated into a numerical equivalent up to 500. So the lowest grade you can get in OET is 0, of course, and the highest grade is 500 depending on how many points you got in your listening or reading tests. Now, OET is quite secretive when it comes to the grading criteria for listening and for reading. In fact, you don't really have a matrix that you can look at to compare your raw score against the converted numerical scores. But what OET is very clear about is that if you get 30 points out of 42 points, that is likely going to give you a B. And in most countries that accept the OET, B is the requirement for the listening and reading components of the test. So just get around 30 points out of 42 points and you're good to go in the test. But this is going to be dependent, once again, just like in other English exams, on the difficulty of the test. If the examination is super difficult, then that might be adjusted to a little bit lower than 30 points. But unfortunately, if your examination is super easy, then that might be adjusted to a higher raw score, maybe 31 or 32, and that's going to be dependent again on the difficulty level. On average, 30 points will be sufficient.
Well, I started teaching IELTS in May of 2006, and we recorded this video in 2023, so that means to say, as of 2023, I've been teaching for 17 years now. But I've noticed that in IELTS, some candidates are usually having difficulties in getting the target band scores for writing or speaking, or sometimes it's both. But in OET, since 2015, we had reviewees getting the target scores in writing and speaking. But sometimes it's in reading where they do not get the target band score. So I'd like to ask Sir Brian, what do you think are possible reasons why in OET reading there are candidates who find this a little more challenging than IELTS reading? Now, this is not to say that it's the case for everyone, but how come in OET reading there are candidates who find this more challenging as evidenced by the national average?
Yeah, it's a combination of factors. The first one is that Part A requires that you are very expedient. You need to be very quick at finding the answers because you have a total of 20 items to respond to and you have to do everything within the span of 15 minutes only. So you should be spending less than 1 minute per item, and that includes you reading the questions, reading the passages, and answering the questions at the same time. So it's really the time pressure sometimes when people are anxious because they have not had enough practice, or perhaps they are not confident that they can finish the reading examination. That anxiety brings about a lot of problems in Part A of the examination. Moreover, when they get to parts B and C of the examination, they would actually be able to see that the passages are a little bit more difficult to understand compared to other English exams. The skill level and the comprehension skills that people should have when it comes to parts B and C should be very high, I would say, because even if you're an expert in reading perhaps, or you are fond of reading, it is not an assurance that when you get to parts B and C of the examination you'll get a perfect score, because questions can be tricky
Mhm.
and that the passages are also very hard to understand sometimes, and it's quite long, to be very honest. So this brings about a lot of challenges and obstacles that people have to face, but with the right amount of preparation and practice, I am very certain that these obstacles can be easily hurdled by anyone who's preparing for the OET. It's just that those people who are inexperienced to take the
Mhm.
exam or probably have not prepared well for the examination are easily intimidated by the test, and they usually get poor scores in the exam.
So, Sir Brian, before I ask for the test taking strategies for OET reading, I just want to ask, is there a difference or a significant difference for that matter between OET on paper reading
Oh.
subtest and OET on computer reading subtest?
Wow, that's a great question, because a lot of people are contemplating, would I take OET on paper
Mhm.
or OET on computer? Well, when it comes to the test format, there's absolutely no difference.
I see.
But when it comes to the test delivery, there is a big difference.
Mhm.
Because when you're taking your OET on paper, you can actually go back to questions. You
Okay.
can flip the pages back and forth, go back to questions you have not been able to answer, especially in part B and C of the examination. You can skip an item and go back to it later. But when you're taking OET on computer, one thing that you will encounter is that the questions only move forward and there's no going back. So when you move on to the next item, there's absolutely no chance for you to go back to previous items. So you can't just leave an item blank or empty and go back to it later. You have to answer the questions sequentially.
Now I get it. So, this is what people have been waiting for. What are the effective test taking strategies to pass OET reading so that if this is not their first time, hopefully it's going to be their last?
time. Okay, so I would like to share with you a few strategies that you can employ in your reading examination that will ultimately help you to achieve a higher score, and one of which is to not rely on practice tests too much.
Mhm.
Some people are addicted to practice tests, like they do practice tests one after the other.
Uh-huh.
In one day, they can finish three, and it gets very upsetting, frustrating, and depressing because they're wasting the exercises. It's like you're testing the same level of proficiency multiple times over, so you're
Mhm.
not able to achieve higher score. The best way to really prepare for the examination is to try one practice test and then try to rationalize the questions, try to figure out where you were able to successfully get the right answers and where you committed mistakes and what you could have done to probably get a better score. In this way, you'll be able to understand better how you answer questions and how you can strategize next time so that you'll be able to get the higher score. Try to space out your practice tests. Maybe just do one every week and not 5 in a week, because OET has very limited resources.
Agree.
I mean, when you go online, there are
Mhm.
not really a lot of practice tests. And thankfully, here at 9.09er, we have our original materials for OET, right, sir?
Yes, if you're an enrollee of our Platinum Dashboard or Platinum Review Package, we have our very own set of materials that you cannot find elsewhere. So all you have to do is go to ninerenglish.com if you'd like to have a free trial, then sign up for one. But if you want the full course, we offer this at a very affordable fee of just 13 US dollars per month, and voila, you get to have access to all sorts of videos, practice tests for listening, reading, writing, speaking, and we also have videos on grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation and accent neutralization, spelling, and we also have bonus lessons like what's the difference between IELTS and OET, or how to process your application in going to the UK, or what are the different pathways in going to Canada, or a short overview of CBT and OSCE, because chances are these are the next examinations that you're going to take after you pass your OET or occupational English test. So guys, If you want to know more about various English examinations, IELTS, OET, PTE, TOEFL, CELPIP, or you want to learn more about listening, reading, writing, speaking, all you have to do is send us an email or a private message. Let us know which particular topic you want us to focus on in our future videos because we always listen. You will notice the 9.09er now is not the same as the 9.09er 2 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, because we constantly innovate. And speaking of innovations, we have important news to share with you in the coming months. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel. But as early as now, I want to give you an idea. One skill retake in the IELTS is about to be implemented soon. So if you're interested in just retaking one subtest, then you don't have to go through the entire process of taking all the 4 subtests. We're just waiting for the go signal before we release our video talking about one skill retake in the IELTS. And for the candidates based in the Philippines, you will know that 9.09er is always at the forefront of updates. We are always the first to deliver the necessary and vital information that might help you in not just passing your English exams, but also in pursuing your overseas application. So once again, we are 9.09er and we'll see you in our future videos. Bye!
Bye!